Now it's time for a look at the second section of Nephilim, which opens up with a bit of fiction, an in-character piece of fiction, and then moves into the steps of character creation. So, Nephilim, occult role-playing from 1994. An unusual bit of BRP and a translation of an intriguing French game. To call this exploration Chapter 2 is a bit of a misnomer. Chapter 1 looked at the introduction and some of the historical background presented to Game Master and players so they could get their head around this game. Chapter 2 is actually referred to as Part 1, Past Lives, and it runs from page 17 to page 88. And comprises most of character creation for Nephilim. And don't let that daunt you, because there's a lot of repeated material, because you're making a lot of choices about periods of time, which are laid out in the book so that you can make educated choices about those periods. You don't have to read through every single page in these 70-some pages. It's quite impressive, actually, to see this much effort presented in helping players try to undertake the challenge of playing ageless, eternal characters like this. Part 1, Past Lives, is not only the name of this section of the book, it also seems to be the name of the work of in-character fiction, which opens its first page, which puts us into the mind of a character named Kragar, who is an incarnated Nephilim who's fairly far advanced along the path toward Agartha, meaning that the metamorphosis, the physical transformation from human, a human that this Nephilim has possessed, toward a form more representative of this character's place in the spectrum that balances the Ka elements, the spiritual elements that we talked about in the last clip. So this character seems to me to be what's referred to as the snake. And I'll see if I can show the character art for the snake. It's kind of dim. But basically, we've got a very angular serpent man wearing, Oakley's sunglasses and a beret. And, yeah. The snake is the hardest metamorphosis to characterize because of its very nature, it says in the book. As a quote from the fictionalized patron saint of our authors who have helped the authors stumble onto all this information. The snake is the hardest metamorphosis to characterize because of its very nature. Its main characteristic is to constantly change its personality, hence the difficulty in pinning it down. We have, however, been able to narrow down these following traits. The snake is an illusionist, a trickster, and a liar. So, the metamorphosis itself is just an overview to help establish what we're going to be talking about the next 70-some-odd pages. The metamorphosis is described as being in conjunction with the aurora borealis, the metal silver, the snake, the color black, mythological being with whom it would be associated would be Loki, famous human being would be Lucretia Borgia, human activity, treachery, a work of art, an Escher picture. Weapon, choice weapon, would be a syringe of poison. Object, a false ID card. The body itself, over time, would come to appear. The head would have reptilian eyes. Hands would shrink. Skin, scaly. Odor, none. The voice, hissing. So, by looking at this one-page description, and keeping certain questions in mind, if I were a naturally occurring wonder, what would I be? I'd be the aurora borealis. If I were a famous human being, who would I be? I'd be Lucretia Borgia. The player gets insight into not you must play this, but these are the ephemeral qualities of being which characterize this state. Right? It's, ballpark figures at which to shoot in your characterization of this type of being. I find that interesting. So we get in the eyes, we get into the mind and eyes of this creature named Kragar in the opening fiction. And this creature is trying to free other Nephilim which have been trapped for hundreds or thousands of years. And it has easy access to magic, but it's afraid of hunters. It has a certain amount of power. It has a certain amount of arrogance. It treats a homeless person with disdain and revels in causing fear, but yet cowers in the shadows, afraid of hunters, and desperate to complete its ritual on time and free its friends, will have allies in its quest, again, to perhaps increase its chance of survival. Right, we encounter this character again when we get to page 89 and part 2, where the character is being hunted. But what happens in part 1? We open up, we are given the character sheet and the initial steps of character creation. And this is one of those games, maybe one of the earliest games, which separated one aspect of the character from the other. So, in other words, the last thing that you're going to do is roll your stats. You're going to figure out who this Nephilim was. Right? So the steps of character creation are to figure out which spiritual force you are aligned with, your Ka. The metamorphosis that Ka will push you toward. What tribe you belong to, which are allied along the major arcana of the tarot to make it easier for the player, really. The past lives in which you have been incarnated. And then, finally, your current human form, your simulacrum. Or simulacrum, if you prefer. All right. So we move from the character sheet, which is pretty much your typical BRP character sheet, although it has the major arcana in the upper corner. And the characteristics are Ka, strength, constitution, intelligence, dexterity, charisma. And the roles provided, which are characteristics times 3%, are vision, effort, resistance, idea, agility, and persuade. We have a little narrow column down one side for different weapons. It's got quite a number of them, number of slots. We have attribute bonuses. We have a section for hit points. We have a section for the magic points. And then we have the typical BRP skills with blanks provided for extra things that you might need to fill in. So, not a bad character sheet. Also has a back, right? And the back of the character sheet further goes into your metamorphosis, your simulacrum, your past awakenings, and then the techniques you know for sorcery, summoning, and alchemy. Okay, so now we're all kind of excited. What would I be able to do? What's sorcery like? And what's summoning like? Now, we begin with Ka. It says all beings in Nephilim are defined by their characteristics, and Ka is the name of the characteristic which defines a Nephilim. It's a very kind of Egyptian theme there. Ka is an Egyptian word, and the ancient Egyptian texts provided us with our earliest useful information on the nature of the Nephilim. Even in the character creation section, the tone is half game, half in-world document. Right. So the Ka characteristic represents the vital energy of the Nephilim, but it's more than that. It's the synthesis of the 5 magical fields. What is Ka. More than anything else in this game, Ka is the spiritual essence of your character. It enables them to do magic. It enables them to communicate in their secret mystical language of Enochian. It enables them to reach Agartha, their goal, right? Their spiritual enlightenment. When you start the game, you begin with choosing your Ka. So you're choosing between the element of air, earth, fire, water, or moon, as we discussed in the previous clip, and your dominant Ka begins at a score of 22. Now, by now, those of you who are mathematically inclined may be scratching your heads and wondering about this. There's a maximum score of 20 for each of the 5 Ka elements, or there's a maximum score of 100, and they're capped at 20, and you have a dominant score of 22, and you can raise it up to 90. How does this all work? I'm glad you asked. This pentacle in the corner of the character sheet kind of establishes this. Right? It has the fire, air, earth, water, and moon element, and some other things in here. And it helps the player decide to balance neutral and opposing forces within the body of their own character. And yes, you do start with 22 points in your dominant Ka. But for every past life that you're going to have in the game, this score is reduced. And the score that you have in the dominant Ka dictates what score the others will have. And there's a handy chart. This is early Chaosium. This is BRP. There are simple charts. In fact, there's a 2-page spread for awakening. Not creating or building your character, but awakening your Nephilim. Right? I love these. These are fantastic. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. And then tucked in the side, there are the number of actions that you'd get. There's the damage bonus you'd get for your simulacrum in whatever case. And then adjustments for the Ka element. So let's say you had a dominant Ka of 15. Right? So I find 15 on the chart. And then the major neutral element would be 12, the minor neutral element would be 9, minor opposed 6, and major opposed would be 3. Right. And that would be the distribution of points. So that's not so bad. So really what you do is you pick which one is the most interesting to you. And the game itself says, please read at least half of the game to understand the influence of these elements on the entire game, right? Don't just pick because you think it sounds cool and then discover that you won't be able to do because of this opposition element. You won't be able to do what you want to do. So understand what the relationship between the elements are first. Understand your metamorphosis first. And then go through character generation. I think that's good advice for just about any game, but there are some games which just kind of beg you to make a character and figure it out as you go along. This might not be that game, even if you're well versed in, kind of 90s fun occult and BRP. So the things which will affect your choice of Ka, which will affect pretty much everything about who your character is, it's the number of past lives and the actual Ka itself, the characteristics of that spiritual force. Now, as we said a couple of times, the original value is 22, minus 2 points for each incarnation, including the one that you're awakening now. So you can start with a maximum score of 20, and this would be your first incarnation. The more incarnations you have, the more likelihood, the more skill you will have in different areas. Okay, so, such as collecting a vast amount of occult knowledge. However, the more times you have incarnated, the weaker you are overall. So it's a balancing game. The game steps in to suggest that 2 or 3 lives would be best. The first Ka element listed is fire. It's depicted as being at the top of the pentacle because flame burns up. Nice image, common interpretation. Says the Ka element, we could expect characters like this to be passionate. We could expect them to be violent. It associates them with fire and light, obviously. It represents physical and mental exertion, artistic inspiration, force, violence, destruction. It is activity and motion. These Nephilim have a tendency to react, right? They love action, movement, are impatient. They're the strong arm. They might wind up being judge, jury, executioner, right? They're seekers of the absolute. They're researchers. They're passionate, on and on and on. This is how fire is embodied. If this is the type of character you are seeking, you would consider fire. You'd also have to weigh what would then be in opposition within your own characteristic. Which aspects of being a Nephilim are you suppressing in order to bring this element to the fore? I like this decision process. Air acts upon the magical fields of air. They interact with atmosphere, gases, wind, hurricanes, that sort of thing, with flying life forms. Symbolically, air represents spiritual heights, comprehension, intellect. So these Nephilim tend to be intellectuals, thinkers, discoverers of the mysteries of the universe. They can also be instinctive and mindless, like storms. A few of them think that scientific discoveries lead to illumination, to Agartha. Doesn't mention violence so much, but it does maybe suggest temperamental, eccentric, that sort of thing. Earth. It enables magic with minerals, mountains, earthquakes, immobile life forms, right? Trees, flowers, that sort of thing. It's linked to preservation, regeneration, growth. It's focused on growth, protection, healing. As a result, Earth Nephilim can be melancholy, calm, reserved, apathetic, timid, difficult to convince. You're seeing a wide range of personalities represented in each of these Ka, and that's intentional, I'm sure, to allow the greatest number of players to have access to the elements that they're drawn to. Many Earth Nephilim are in love with the Earth, and they're oriented toward protecting things, saving things. Okay. They can be altruistic, reliable, sensual, free, violent, and even destructive, like an earthquake. Water, obviously associated with things which flow and move. It represents the inner life, the occluded self, emotions, perception, what's hidden in the depths. It's linked to movement, transformation, adaptation, transition. So these Nephilim adapt to new situations. They're very curious. They're technicians with an acute practical sense. They are curious. They can become whimsical or fantastical, short-tempered and unpredictable, difficult to control, like the sea. The moon. The Ka element of the moon, well, this is, remember, it was in a decreased state compared to the others after the wars of ages past. It's described as illusory or cyclical, like a mirage, like rainbows, auroras, will-o'-the-wisps, tides, the phases of the moon. Nephilim that are in this aspect are lost in a world of their own making, perhaps, or they're attracted to deviance or madness. They can be seen as buffoons, jokers, fools, unstable characters, liars, cheats. They are just as likely to be fantastically imaginative, dreamers, or poets. Final important point about the moon. Many consider it to be taboo because it's inconsistent, shifting and changing. There's also the black moon, which we discussed earlier. Right. So Nephilim naturally mistrust anyone who is aligned with the moon. Fair enough. Now, Ka is also represented in the game world as Orichalka, the negative force, that which can destroy Ka. The solar Ka, which is the most potent, what evolves all life. The Nephilim seek the ability to bond with this Ka, and this is why they are seeking Agartha. Right? The Nephilim can manipulate Solar Ka after they achieve Agartha. Right? Nephilim may fall to madness, which happens for a number of mechanical reasons in the game. Right? They may become bestial or only instinctual. They may take on some kind of unusual metamorphosis, such as giantism or dwarfism or some ethereal form or elemental form, something like this. They're unable to interact and communicate with their society or our society, and this may last for an extended period of time, but they can recover from it. Or after bad events, they may lose control of the human body that they inhabit, right? And again, this will last for a period of time where the Nephilim has been essentially dispossessed of its host. And finally, there is narcosis, a period where it falls into a deep sleep. The chapter then, or the section then, moves into a study of metamorphosis, where we learn the different character types, the different metamorphoses, and we're given the theories of Robert Flood, who talks about the opposing forces, and so how your metamorphosis will have a positive aspect and a negative aspect, and as it develops, of course, you'll have a harder and harder time socializing among humanity. Right? So the 9 common metamorphoses, and the game does speak about how you can design your own. They could be a Jinn, the Phoenix, the Triton, the Undine, the Satyr, Elf, Sylph, Angel, or Snake. And then it goes through, as I mentioned earlier, ways to get inside the head of a person so along this path. Right, so we have the spiritual and the physical metamorphosis. The next section is called the Major Arcana. Now, we know these from the tarot. The conceit of the game, of course, is that the tarot were drawn from these tribes of Nephilim, and the purpose of these tribes is seeking Agartha through different ways. It implies very strongly that your character will have belonged to only one tribe during the entire course of their existence. It's the way that they are seeking their ascent to this state of Agartha. The section then goes through each of them from Arcanum 0, the Fool, on to the World, Arcanum 21. Right? And each one is just a paragraph describing its approach. Like Key 8, the Arcanum 8, Strength. This small arcanum has specialized to fight against the Kaiba form of Ka degeneration, where the Nephilim falls to instinct. They are fierce enemies of Arcanum 15, the Devil, and thus an exception to the rule of non-violence against other Nephilim. So a simple thing to take in and realize that this is essentially your family or your secret society among other Nephilim. So this just takes a few pages and then brings us to Occult Experience. This section of character creation is focused on 3 major areas of magic, which we mentioned earlier: sorcery, summoning, and alchemy. Each of these 3 is further subdivided into 3 circles of magic. I think it's important to mention here that an entire other source book on magic was written after the game was released to replace this system. The system is reputed or reported to work well enough, yet maybe doesn't go far enough in the themes of the game. And so a book called the Liber Ka, the Book of Ka, was written to provide a more occult magic system for the game. So maybe we'll do that at the end of all of this. The first type of magic described is sorcery. It's first described because it's considered to be the oldest, and it's a direct form of magic where the Nephilim is able to interact with the universe. It requires physical paraphernalia, right? So they memorize the ritual, but they also have physical aspects to channel energy through. And it can be connected to any one of the 5 elements. It's arranged in hierarchies of ability: lesser magic, higher magic, and the grand secret. and there are certain thresholds of knowledge that the Nephilim must have in order to have any effect with these abilities at all. The second magical art is summoning, which uses summoning circles and pentacles. It's organized much like sorcery, with thresholds to establish the level of knowledge required to go up through these three levels of the art, which are seals, pentacles, and keys. And this is essentially not a bidding war, but a war for control, your Ka versus the summoned creature's Ka. And if you win, then the creature is compelled to serve you. It's kind of cool. The last type of magic described is also the last developed, and no Nephilim is able to start learning it until after its creation in the 12th century. Another cool thing. So new is it, in fact, that although it does have three circles or three hierarchies, the third one has yet to be developed, and this is another in-game motivator for things that the Nephilim might be trying to do. And one of the signature characters in here does talk about trying to find the Philosopher's Stone. The three levels of the art are called Black Stone, White Stone, and then finally Philosopher's Stone. This newly developing magical lore is got a lot of hooks in it to drive the Nephilim beyond the quest for Agartha. So that's kind of interesting. It works otherwise mechanically the same way. It has thresholds and the like. The last element of magic is called Arcanum lore, and this is your character's ability, once they incarnate in a particular era, to reconnect with their tribe, noticing the hidden signs and sigils around that will help them get in contact with people in their own tradition. Now, as we go through this whole section, there are small box sections, as is common in early Chaosium products, or I guess this is middle-aged Chaosium product, which continue the character generation example. In Call of Cthulhu, we learn about Harvey Walters as he's generated, and we learn the system through the trials and tribulations of Harvey Walters as he deals with someone breaking into a house and that sort of thing. But here, the character from the fiction is described as being created, and there's an oddity which I guess we should point out. Now, Kregar, the character from the fiction, is clearly described in the fiction as being serpentine. He has scales. He's described as having a serpentine face, a long tongue. He hisses. He is clearly allied with the element of fire, right? But his scaly skin, serpentine face, and snake-like description mark him as being a snake. Yet in the character generation example, he's marked as being Jinn. And as you read through the Metamorphosis the Snake, that really seems to be tied very strongly to the moon. So, a little bit of dramatic license, a little bit of mistake, or, not everybody involved in the creation process reading all the material. It's hard to say. But that could be confusing for a reader who is kind of stuck on the literal world and gets jammed when things don't precisely match. There is a lot of structure in the character creation chapters, but they're the kind of structure that's supposed to allow those limits, the limits inspiring the artist to create within them. Not really shackling to, you must do it this way. So keep that in mind, I guess, as you go through. In a work like this, there's bound to be confusing passages and errors. The last element of that occult chapter is dealing with the stasis as a magical item. This is an item in which the spirit of the Nephilim may retreat or may become trapped. Your Nephilim has become linked to this magical objects, and they were first invented tens of thousands of years ago as receptacles to hold their Ka elements between incarnations and prevent their disassociation, their loss of memory, the loss of self, which we talked about in the first installment. They can also use it for magical rituals. So, kind of an important thing, again linked to this new alchemy path. This element of gameplay gives us a hook, gives us a sense of urgency, gives us something to protect. As a Nephilim, you can only ever have one of these objects, and when you first incarnate, you feel a compulsion to find it. You're connected to it. You're drawn to it. It's like another body. It actually is, it serves the same function as the human host that you have now. It enables you to be you. It's something that needs to be found and protected. If it's ever destroyed, so are you. You will, at the destruction of your body, be discorporated back into random elements of energy, never to be you again. So, something of great significance. So, we have seen the great power of the Nephilim. We've seen their ability to amass tremendous amounts of knowledge at the expense of spreading themselves very thin across the ages of mankind. And now we have seen one of their weaknesses. Interesting. And this moves us into the past lives section. Now, a lot of famous people are name dropped in here and implied to have been Nephilim. The Jinn, for example, claims to have been, Temujin, Genghis Khan. And this could be a claim. This could be truth. It's up to your group to decide. You may find it more compelling if the famous people of history were just people, or from time to time if they had an occult host. If all the world's history is shaped by the Nephilim, it may not be satisfying for all of your players. So the way the past lives chapter goes is they ask you a series of questions like, what did you do and what did you learn and what did you have to do? What was your occupation during those times to guide you into allocating skill points in a sensible fashion rather than an optimization fashion. And you get two pages like this, a 2-page spread of an era. So the first one is Pre-Dynastic Egypt, 5000 BC. The page is split into 4 sections. Your host, your life, secret societies, the dominant arcana historically at that time, and the historical context. So it's a pretty quick thing to read. Do I want to be alive in this era or not? Turn the page. Memphis, Egypt, 3000 BC. Thebes, 1350 BC. Babylon, 600 BC. Alexandria, 350 BC. Jerusalem, 30. Right. Rome, 350. Germany, 830. France, 1243. France again, 1630. England, 1900. And there you go. So, a reasonable spread of time for you to have been around and learning things, right? Then we close out with developing your actual physical host now. Basic attributes. First one being gender. Doesn't matter, male or female. It has no bearing on the life of your Nephilim than you wish it to have. Age. It recommends 16 to 50 years. We get into social status. We have the opportunity role, which is a feature of BRP. This is about your social level, your education, life experience, culture, subculture, profession, income, residence, family relationships, your appearance, possessions, skills. Right? Now, they have a list of professions to think about, and there's a D100 list where you can simply roll, right? You can choose or roll is advised in the chart. And that's, things like airline pilot or house painter, police officer, neo-druid, new age publisher, Marine Corps private. So there's a wide range of types represented to either just use or to have spark ideas. Right? And depending on your traits, right, Like, for example, your dexterity. This will determine the number of actions you might have per round. This will be very important if you're like a physical kind of character, an Indiana Jones kind of going into temples looking for secret signs of your arcanum, looking for stasis objects of your enemies, that sort of thing. Having a lot of actions per round will be good. High strength for damage bonus. Hit points, your vitality determined by your constitution. And then, of course, your dominant Ka characteristics will influence some of these things, right? Fire affecting strength, earth affecting constitution, air affecting intelligence, water affecting dex, and moon affecting charisma. How do you determine your traits? Right? Well, this is BRP. So, you roll 2d6 plus 6 for intelligence, and 3d6 for everything else. Done. So let's say you picked, I don't know, house painter as the person that your spirit has possessed, right? So it gives a small little block for you to learn about them from. So male, age 22, social status 4, education 12. They almost graduated from high school. Modern American, alternative kind of person. Profession, house painter. In brackets, it says drug dealer. Income, $6,000 from painting, $42,000 from miscellaneous. Residence, apartment with girlfriend. Family relationship, has a girlfriend. Appearance, worn, casual. Possessions, a Ford Bronco, trashed, a 9mm automatic, and a mean watchdog. And it lists some relevant skills and whatnot. And this is a guide. Do you want to be this guy? Do you want to meet this guy? Do you want to be able to use this guy in the game? It's just right here in this several page spread. With your group, you might decide to work out exactly what your metamorphosis. You might be designing custom ones, and likewise for your simulacra, you might be working out custom ones like those, or simply drawing from the book for speed or ease or what have you. And that takes us all the way to the end of part 1. Part 2, again, begins with fiction, and we'll deal with that another day. If you've made it through to the end of this one, you are an iron person of great tenacity, perseverance, fortitude. I salute you.